Hey, what's up everybody? 8-Bit Flashback here. Today I will be reviewing the PocketGO handheld gaming console and testing emulation out for various different systems, including Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Game Boy Advance, PlayStation, Neo Geo, Arcade, and more. Plus, I'm also going to show you how to fix screen tearing issues. The PocketGO is an improved Fallout version of the BitBoy with a completely new landscape design, plus left and right shoulder buttons and a volume control dial. It also features a 2.4-inch IPS screen with tempered glass and a micro SD card slot to add your own games. Located on the top of the handheld, you'll find the reset button, the audio jack, the charging port, the AV output, and the micro SD card slot. And on the sides of the handheld, you'll find the power control and the volume control. Inside the box, you'll find a USB charging cable and a micro SD card reader that'll plug into a USB slot, plus a quick setup guide. And there's also some extra buttons, so if you want to replace the action buttons on this handheld console, you can. It's pretty simple to do. You got 4 screws on the back of the case, then that snaps apart. Then there's 2 screws that secure the circuit board inside there. If you remove those, that'll give you access to the front action buttons. But you do want to be careful as you're taking this apart. There's a lot of smaller pieces and they could be lost easily, so just pay attention and make sure everything goes back in the same exact place. And I do prefer the color of these buttons a little bit more because it is the same as a Super Famicom controller, and I really like those colors. Now let's go ahead and power this up and check it out. There's a couple built-in applications. There is a movie player, a file explorer, and a couple other applications, but to be honest, I have not messed with any of those. The only thing I have played with is the emulators. So there are a bunch of built-in emulators, as well as a few built-in games, which are mostly homebrew games or remakes of existing games. And there's also some settings you can play with, including the theme. Now let's go ahead and move right to some emulation testing, and we'll start with the Game Boy Advance using the GPSP emulator called GBA Rumble. And we'll try out some Castlevania. For the sound, I would say it's not great, but it's definitely not bad. I'd say it's plenty acceptable for this little handheld. So for most of the emulators that are available on the PocketGO, the emulator menu can be accessed by pushing the reset button that's located on the top of the handheld console. And when you push that, that will give you access to various different settings, such as the aspect ratio and save states. Now, because there's multiple different types of emulators on this device, when you access the emulator menu by pushing the button on the top, you will be greeted by a different type of menu that might have different types of options. But for the most part, with every emulator that's on this device, you will have the option for the save states and the aspect ratio. As far as the gameplay goes with most of the emulators on this device, I would say it's pretty decent. I wouldn't say anything's great, but I'd say most of it is acceptable, but I do have issues with screen tearing. And I did have these issues with the BitBoy, and I would say it is an improvement with the new PocketGO, but there is still some issues. And I did try playing with some of the custom firmware that is available for the PocketBoy that's out there right now, and I was not having any luck getting rid of the screen tearing. But I did find a fix that seems to be working, and I'll share that with you here in just a few. So this is Pulseman for Sega Genesis, and I'd say it's plenty playable, but there is some screen tearing that's going on. If we look closely at some of the vertical columns in the background, you can see those kind of separating from each other, kind of staggering, and they should not be doing that when you're moving back and forth. And with various other games, you might run into the same issues. You're going to see spots in the background that kind of separate themselves from each other, and that's an effect that should not be happening. That's called screen tearing, and to some people this is not a big deal. They can play the game and it's just not an issue for them. But for other people out there, it can be a big deal. But luckily for me, I did find a fix for this after watching a video posted by Game DoDo. And I will leave a link to his video down below. And the fix is very simple to do. All you have to do is add one file to the main partition of your micro SD card inside the kernel folder. So if you open up the kernel folder, you're going to find a file in there that's labeled .ko, and this is the file that you're going to replace. But before you replace that, I would highly recommend to go ahead and back up this file. So you can do that by making a new folder inside here called original. Now we're going to go ahead and move our original.ko file to the original folder and store that inside there, so we can use that later on if we need to. So my original KO file is now in a safe place. Now on the left side of the screen, what I did is I downloaded a new file that replaces the original KO file. And a link to this new KO file will be down below. So here's a look at what was happening before adding the new KO file. So the screen tearing is pretty obvious in the background there. Now let's check it out with the new KO file in place. And it seems to be a drastic improvement. If we check out the background now, I don't notice any screen tearing happening like it was before. So whatever's going on with this new file seems to be fixing the problem. Now I have not had a lot of time to mess with this new KO file, so I don't know if there's any other issues that it presents with other emulators, and that's why I backed up my original KO file. So if there is any other issues with other emulators not working properly after using this, I can just switch right back to that original KO file. Now let's move on to some other emulation testing. This is one of the pre-installed games. This is Quake. And it seems to be doing a fairly good job. It's a little choppy at times, but I'd say for the most part it is playable. And I would like to mention that I had most of my video already edited and finished before I figured out the screen tearing fix. So some of the footage you may see might show some of that screen tearing, but as of now, all the issues I was having with screen tearing seem to be resolved with the new fix. But again, I have not had proper time to test this completely, so there may be issues with this new file that I am unaware of. And here's another built-in game. This is Wolfenstein 3D, and it seems to be playing pretty nice. Now let's try some Neo Geo out, and out of all the games I tested, they seem to be playing it very close to full speed, and I'd say they are very playable. Now let's go ahead and talk about the PocketGO itself. The D-pad on this seems to be really nice. With all the games I tested, it's nice and responsive, and I have not had any issues. And that goes the same with the rest of the buttons on this. As far as the looks go, I really like the looks of this. I like the color of it, and especially with my colored buttons on here, it really is a nice looking little handheld. The 2.8-inch IPS screen looks great from all angles. I can turn this at any angle and still see that screen great, so it makes it very easy to play. And for the button layout with this new landscape version, I'm a fan of this as well because this is nice and comfortable when I'm holding my hands. I don't feel cramped, everything feels like it should, even though this thing is really tiny. Now let's try out some arcade games using the MAME for All emulator. And with this emulator, it's really hit or miss. There's some games that seem to work just fine, like Punisher, and then there's a lot of other games that don't seem to work. So it seems to be like the 80s games seem to work fine, but a lot of the 90s games is really hit or miss. And here's another arcade game using the same emulator. This is Mortal Kombat 2. And as you can see, it's not doing so well, and I would not consider this playable. Now let's try out some PlayStation, and if you're looking to play PlayStation on the PocketGO, I would suggest looking for 2D games, because it can play some 2D games alright. But if you're looking to play any of the 3D games or more demanding games, I don't think it's going to happen on the PocketGO. This is Rayman, and it's playing surprisingly well. The frames per second count is pretty high, and for the most part it plays smooth. So with some 2D games, as you can see here, it plays just fine. But with other games like Tekken III, which is a 3D game and a little bit more demanding game, it doesn't do so great. The frames per second gets really low, making the game unplayable. But even though you can't play all the PlayStation games, being able to play some of them is better than nothing. Now let's try some PC Engine, and we'll play R-Type. And the emulation seems to be doing fairly well, not really noticing problems. Here's a Gameboy Color game. This is Rayman. And one thing that's weird about this is the emulation seems to be pretty good, but one thing I did notice is the volume on this game is way higher than a lot of the other emulators. I'm not sure why, but it is. Now let's find a Sega Master System game to try out. This is Shinobi. And I didn't notice any issues besides the screen tearing, but again, I did get that issue corrected with that file fix I showed earlier. so it seems to be playing just fine. And here is some Super Nintendo using the SNES 9X 4D emulator, and we'll try out some Super Street Fighter. And so far, so good. Now, with all these emulators I've been testing, obviously I can't test every game, and I'm sure there's going to be some games here and there that don't work properly. But for the most part, the results should be pretty consistent with what I've shown here in the video. Okay, it's time for me to get out of here, but I will leave you with some emulation testing for the original NES playing some Contra. Have yourself a great day, and I'll see you next time.